Masa al-khair, Erev Tov, good evening everyone, and welcome to day 7 of 10 days of return. My name is Rachel Betarieh, and I'm the director of Zochrot, which is an organization that educates within Israeli society, especially for acknowledgement of the Nakba, responsibility for the ongoing Nakba, and for Palestinian right to return. 10 Days of Return is a series of tours, talks, and gatherings between Israeli Independence Day and Nakba Day to learn, acknowledge, and reimagine. Tonight, we return virtually to Jerusalem, Eluds. And it is my great pleasure to welcome to our platform the wonderful Palestinian-American writer, Mona Hajjar Halaby, who is here to talk about her amazing book, In My Mother's Footsteps, A Palestinian Refugee Returns Home. And here to introduce Mona and to talk with her about the book and the journey is the bookseller of Jerusalem, a cultural activist, literary critic, a regular commentator for media and local political discussions, one of the managers of the iconic Jerusalemite cultural institution, the educational bookshop, my friend Mahmoud Muna. Thank you both for being here, Mona and Mahmoud. I cannot wait to listen to your conversation. Just a little housekeeping before we begin. If you want to ask Mona about the book, please type your question in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, not the chat, but the Q&A, and there will be time for questions in the end. At the chat right now, you can type where you are joining us from. We would love to see where you are right now. Before we begin, just another word. We weren't planning on speaking directly of current political events. But the reality is that this regime of apartheid, of ongoing Nakba, provides daily reasons to grieve and to rage. This morning, grief struck in Jerusalem when the city lost one of its favorite daughters, a courageous and truthful journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh. Israeli forces shot her dead when she was covering the raid in Jenin. I wish to dedicate this event to her. May she rest in power. And with that, I hand over to you, Mahmoud. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you for the invitation, and thanks for Zochrot for doing this week and for all the other things. Zochrot is one of the few Israeli organizations that I really hugely respect, and I appreciate their work. Keep up the good work, and we hope that your work and the works of others will eventually pays off and will change some of the realities and some of the denial realities that we're living in Israel and Palestine. All right, I will move swiftly to the book. It's kind of strange setup to be on Zoom myself in Jerusalem, and Rachel in Tel Aviv, I'm guessing, and Mona back in the USA, and to talk about a journey of a Palestinian refugees and the return of a Palestinian refugee. This autobiography of the daughter and a biography of the mother book that's so nicely written by Mona. I'm going to introduce Mona officially in a couple of lines, and I'll say a few things about the book, and then we go through a few questions, hopefully to flush out the book for our audience, and we'll take some questions into the chat, and then hopefully we'll put them into Mona. So Mona Hajjar Halaby is a Palestinian-American educator, a writer, and residing in California. She's interested in the social history of Palestine. She's Palestinian herself, of course, especially in the first half of the 20th century, and has published several articles on the period of on that period in the Jerusalem Quarterly, a magazine or a quarterly that I really strongly recommend for readers. Her archive of old photographs of Jerusalem and its people is on Facebook under the name British Mandate Jerusalemite. It's a photo library that is so immensely beautiful, and it's kind of a nice resource that often of a word that we forgot. She's a consultant, researcher, and a tour guide in Jerusalem. We Are Here interactive documentary as well. Her memoir, In the Mother of Footsteps, of Palestinian Refugees Return Home, was published in August 2021 by Thread. I was hoping to do this in person, Mona, when you come back to Jerusalem, when you return home. But inshallah, sometime soon. Did I miss anything from your biography? Tell us about yourself, your father, your mother. What really makes Mona that we see on the screen today?
Thank you for your kind words and introduction. I'd like to, before talking about myself, just piggyback on what Rachel said about Shireen Abu Ail, because I feel very, very devastated by the news of her death, her murder today. Her family is very close to my community here, my Palestinian community here in California. I am connected to her cousins and to her uncles and aunts, and I just want to present my condolences to the family and to my fellow Palestinians and to the world. We lost a hero and a sister, and I feel very, very strongly that I need to mention her before I talk about myself. About me, well, you know, as I wrote in my book, figuring out my identity was challenging because I was born to a Palestinian mother, a Syrian father who grew up in Egypt. And then I ended up being a refugee from Egypt as a small child when Nasser nationalized Egypt. And I grew up in Switzerland and Belgium too. So it took a little work for me to figure out who I was. But what was really so important was that my mother was constantly talking about her love of Palestine. And we went there and we met people there and we visited there, and then I married a Palestinian. And so it was clear to me that that was my identity. But I think that most people have to figure out their identity, and it takes a while for us children of the diaspora, because we are, you know, straddling different cultures and different societies. Now I live in the United States, so almost every decade I moved west until I was in my 30s and have been living since in California. I am an educator, former educator, but when you're an educator once, you're an educator always. You know, I taught at very progressive liberal schools that believed in children constructing their knowledge, which I find fascinating because my grandfather, Adel Jaber, used to teach at the Dusturiya school with Khalil al-Sakakini. And of course, that school was very progressive in 1908. So I think it was in my DNA that I ended up being an educator and with that kind of pedagogy. And I'm a writer. I've written books, 2 books prior to this one, and one on parenting and one on my classroom practice, my specialty, which is helping children resolve their conflicts. I'm retired now, and I'm writing my next book about growing up in Egypt in the 1950s. So that's a little synopsis of my life.
Thank you very much for sharing that, because that really is actually par excellence what makes a Palestinian, really. It's the mixture of all of these things. It's a mixture of background. It's the mix of being a Levant, mixed parents from all the Arabic countries, or at least the Levant, when at least people could move freely and intermarriage and easily establish homes in different cities in the old days. But also the story of diaspora, the story of refugees is actually also an important element of what being a Palestinian and the Palestinian identity. All right, so with that in hand, one day you decided that you're gonna write a book. How did that start?
It started with really wanting to take down my mother's memories of her childhood to be able to share with my sons. I have 3 sons, and I thought,
right?
What was that?
She was alive when you decided to start writing.
Yes, she was 78 when I began interviewing her. And that was lucky that she was alive, lucky that she was very eager to tell her stories. And she had a very good memory for the past, even though her memory for the present was starting to be troubled. But I was able to interview her, and I thought I'd print a little booklet that will be just for the family. Well, a couple of years later, I'm invited during my sabbatical year to train the faculty at the Ramallah Friends School in the facilitation of class meetings, conflict resolution, and nonviolent communication. And of course, you know, I was teaching in California, and I got this wonderful offer the year after my sabbatical, but everything worked in my favor that I was able to go and spend that year. My late husband was very supportive and very excited about my prospect, and came and visited me, as I talk about in the book, many times. I think that while I was there, because I'm a person who has written journals since I was a small child. I mean, I was 13 when I started writing a diary and about my life. I started to write, you know, daily at my kitchen table about the experiences of the day. And when I got back to California, it seemed so clear to me that I couldn't write just my mother's story and my story as two separate entities. They were really part of the same story, because while I was in Ramallah, my mother finally, after 59 years of exile, agreed to come and spend some time in Jerusalem and revisit her past, which she had been dreading to do, which a lot of Palestinians share, that experience of the dread of going back and seeing what isn't anymore, what has changed, what was taken away, and bringing up all of those emotions of displacement and dispossession. So I was very lucky that my mother came, and we had that experience of going to her garden, of picking some oranges from that tree, Khoshkhash tree, which still is standing in the backyard, which is on the cover of my book. And that's how the book came about. It came about with her stories. And while I was in Ramallah, she wrote to me 9 letters, which I have published in the book, because I felt it was so important for people to hear her voice, you know, her, not just me paraphrasing her story, but her telling me her story.
Right. There's a few things here to unpack about this amazing story, Mona. I mean, first is the need of the Palestinians, especially the later generation from the Nakba, to actually write.
Yes.
As a bookseller, I always face the reality that so much written about Palestine from non-Palestinians. And I'm starting to see recently, as old or as young I am, started to see recently actually Palestinians taking the initiative and write their own stories. And often the instigator of writing is just to write for my kids, write for my grandsons, but did you felt a sense of responsibility actually for a sense of a national responsibility to document a period?
Yes, there was that sense because of my interest in social history, my interest in old photographs, which I post on British Mandate Jerusalemites, my page on Facebook, that records and documents Palestinian society in the first half of the 20th century. So there was a sense that I did not want to have that the past, the rich past, forgotten. I wanted the younger generations to continue to have a sense of their identity, their history, their culture. So there was that. I mean, it started with my need for my sons and my grandsons to have access to that information, because one day I'll be gone, my mother is gone, that generation, which I call the Nakba generation, is leaving us. And so that their voices need to be heard. So that's definitely.
You were lucky, as I go through the book, and I find that your mom is very talkative and a very storyteller, but perhaps you were lucky actually with the fact that she was able and she wanted to share the story.
You're right.
many parents, including my own family, does not want to actually open up the past as if it is this wound. And I wonder if is that something to do with the Palestinian refugees who actually left Palestine? They're more likely to open up their past and to speak about what happened. And the Palestinians who were internally displaced and remain in Palestine and probably some different areas are more interested in a closure and they don't want to talk about it. Is that something you could reflect on, especially from your knowledge?
You know, it's a very good point you bring up. I think some of it must be that, because in some ways, continuing to live in an occupied, militarized area brings about a lot of anxiety about talking about what happened and what is still happening, the continuation of the Nakba. But I also think it's personality. My mother happened to have been a very chatty woman, a very gregarious social woman who was very, very proud of her Palestine, my Palestine. You know, she was just so proud of it and wanted to tell the world about Palestine, especially Jerusalem, her hometown. So, yeah, I think it's a combination of both.
One of the themes that I also felt reading through the book, that it's a Palestinian story, but not just about a loss and disaster, but it's also a story of love. It's the really detailed story of the social life and how life is that you got through your mom. Present a very interesting also social celebration of how life was in Palestine before she left. And that's something really interesting about memory, of course, and how we deal with memory and not just remembering the hardship and the expulsion of the Palestinians, but also how life was at that time, especially the Muslim-Christian relationship that was also part of your family.
Yes. I feel that I've been very lucky to be a descendant of a mixed religion family, that Islam and Christianity existed in my family and worked very well together in 1918, which to me is astounding, that there was so much tolerance and openness and between the two families, my grandmother and my grandfather's family. I think that you're right, it's a story about love. I think of my memoir as a love song to my mother and to Palestine, which in my dedication I call Palestine my second mother, because I felt that that's, I grew up inhaling Palestine from my mother. And I encourage all mothers to talk to their children about their love of a place, a people, a culture. It really made a huge impact on me, an impact that to this day, I'm singing those songs. The love song that I sang in this book for my mother is something that I want to pass on to future generations.
Mona, if there's any parts of the book that's any point you want to read and share with us, please feel free. But as much as this book is also about Palestine and the Palestinian story, and I think really this is what we really admired the book and really why it's on one of my top lists that I really recommend to people to read. In addition to the emotions and the language and the love in the book, it's also a book about a refugee. It's a book about any refugee. It's actually, there's this universalism in the book, which of course is not unique to Palestine. I mean, the issue of Palestine, the cause of Palestine is a universal issue anyway. Can you tell us how another refugee could relate to that book or not, perhaps?
Oh, I think refugees can relate to that book. As I said in my epilogue, I stand in solidarity with refugees all over the world, especially my brethren refugees that are in refugee camps scattered all around the Arab world. I felt a lot of guilt, and I still feel guilt. The way any survivor who successfully manages outside of their homeland to recover their life, I have the guilt of the survivor who was successful and who was able, through resources and connections, to make a good life for our family. I feel the story is about refugees, and my subtitle is A Palestinian Refugee Returns Home. I wanted those 4 words to be there: Palestinian refugee returns and home, because I think that, this is the essence of the book, really. It's about a Palestinian, my mother, but also me. I return, she returns, and we are home. When I'm in Jerusalem, I am home. It's a way that I can't describe it. I did in the book that, I felt walking in the old city. There are landmarks that are, part of my family history. And there's no other place in the world that has that.
Right. Let's move on with the book to your journey coming to do the sabbatical year at the French school in Ramallah. That was 2006, if I remember correctly.
7 and 8.
2007 and 8. And that was the year, 2006 was the initial trip. That yes. Then you offered the job to come back.
Right.
You came back. I'm glad you did. You did came back, and then you were working at the French school in Ramallah, but you're also making your weekends in Jerusalem.
Yes.
I want to kind of describe this out of the book for us. How was it back then? This is the late stage of the second Intifada as well. Checkpoints already, the wall is already there.
Yes.
And yeah, I'll ask another question about that. But let's kind of paint a picture for us.
All right. I was very honored to be a part of the West Bank, the occupied territories, life experiences. I had the advantage of carrying an American passport, and I talk about that in my book, and it made me very conflicted, but it opened doors for me so that I could go through the checkpoints with some ease, but I could see the distress, the humiliations at the checkpoint, and it made my heart boil. It was very, very hard to see that. But while standing there, I lingered because I thought that at least my American passport could protect some of the people in front of me and behind me, because there was a witness with an American passport there. That's the least thing I could do at the checkpoints. And I walked through the checkpoints with everybody through the turnstile and everything. I wanted to live that experience. I wanted to know what it was like. I was very, very saddened by the condition of the situation for young children that I saw in Ramallah. And these were more privileged children studying at a private school, the Ramallah Friends School. The degree of constant anxiety that these children lived with and how it manifested in their everyday life. They were hyperactive. They were fearful of a lot of things. Everything frightened them. They responded to a conflict immediately with punching another child, physically being aggressive. And so when I first arrived there, I saw why the headmistress had invited me to come and teach the children new ways of communicating. But I understood that I'm not a psychologist, and I'm not qualified to make a diagnosis, but the children were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. There was certainly a lot of those symptoms happening. And I think that what I found fascinating was that at the beginning, when I tried to help them talk about what was going on, they had no language to describe their feelings, their fears. They felt extremely helpless and helpless and unable to find a way to solve problems. There was this sense of passivity or docility, which frightened me, because usually, children are kind of resilient and rambunctious and come up with solutions, but they were clueless about how to solve a problem. And I think that happens when you are under occupation, when you are subjugated, when you see your parents terrified, humiliated, brutalized. There is very little that you can feel you have any strength or any say in the world. And so I feel that by giving them some tools, I saw over the year I was there, that by the end of the year, they could solve their problems. They knew that that there was power in numbers, that they could write a letter to the headmistress and make their requests. All of those things to give them a sense of empowerment and to teach them about democratic values and how you share the power and you have a word and so on. Now, of course, it's only within their school. I cannot change the environment for them that they live in. But I thought that perhaps by giving them those tools, I can make a dent. I can make a difference so that these future leaders, Palestinian leaders, will someday be able to resolve things. Our future is really those children. So it was a very, very powerful experience for me. I learned so much as a teacher. I struggled with it. I was honest in the book about how difficult it was. It's not it's not a piece of cake. It's very hard to come into a society, even though it's my society. I was not living there. I came from the West, and I was very, very aware that I wanted to be respectful of what was happening before I came. I wasn't coming like a messiah with the solutions to everything. I was coming with one way of handling conflict, and I was glad that I could make a difference. They are still doing class meetings. The children are still being trained in that same method 13, 14 years later. So that gives me hope.
And that was just a school, and in 1 or 2 years. I mean, could you reflect on the need for trauma work in Palestine? I mean,
yes, absolutely.
In the Nakba generation have not processed their trauma yet, and then we have been building on.
Right. You're right. The Nakba generation, very few of my mother and her friends have processed their loss. And my mother processed it by talking about it all the time. I think that maybe saved her mental health and gave her the humanity that she had, which I describe in the book, when she can link her arm with the Israeli neighbor and tell him, you are part of this story. To me, that was an example of her being able to transcend what happened to her and see the humanity of all of us. All of us want to be safe. All of us want to be happy and feel surrounded by love. These are basic things like water and air and shelter, And my mother was able to do that. Now, children are affected by what's happening around them, children in the West Bank, in the militarized occupied territories. And I think that having access to mental health is very, very important. I met wonderful people at the Palestine Counseling Center when I was there in the early 2000s. I met Rana Nashashibi, who was running it, and Siham Rashid, and they talked to us about the effects of the occupation on children, the regression, the anxiety, the bedwetting, the selective mutism. And this is not particular to Palestinian children. I mean, you go to Darfur, you go to Yemen, you go to Sudan, you go to Ukraine right now, and you have those same issues. Children are suffering. They are sponges, and they pick up everything. So it was an honor that I could be there to accompany them for a year and to learn from them and to teach them something.
And you lived, I mean, it's just an anecdote that I think is really nice. If you can talk about any kind of reflections on the differences between living in a city like Ramallah and living in a city of Jerusalem. How did you relate it to the two cities, your little encounter with the people, and how that shaped up or strengthened your sense of identity and belonging to the place?
That's nice. Ramallah, when I taught there from Monday through Thursday, I was in this bubble. a bubble of the occupation that was visible there, but also a bubble of how people during the occupation continue to live life fully. And I know that sounds odd to say that, but you know, I went to cafes with other teachers and we have a really nice meal together. I took these beautiful walks in the vineyards and in the olive tree groves, and experienced the love and the connections between people. So that was my Ramallah experience for 5 days a week. And then the weekend, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when I would take the bus, number 18 bus, and go through the checkpoint of Kalandia and arrive in Jerusalem, I would see the soldiers, of course, because Jerusalem is occupied as well. In the old city, I saw, you know, brutalities happening to Palestinians walking down the streets. And I felt there was something more somber in Jerusalem, especially that I stayed in the old city. I had a little apartment I was renting in the Armenian quarter. And I feel that there was something more tense in Jerusalem than there was in Ramallah. And but in Jerusalem is where I felt I belonged, because that was sort of my ancestral home. So I went back and forth. But when I was in Jerusalem, I was there to interview all of my mother's generations, all of her friends who had experienced the Nakba, and hear their stories and scan their old photographs. So I was being an ethnographer on the weekends and an educator on the weekdays. And it was an interesting mix.
That's very nice. I'm going to ask you to treat us with a reading of your choice from the book.
Sure.
Find a piece that I will enforce on you, because the book is fully beautiful, really. But I would rather you choose.
All right. So since you asked me about Ramallah and so on, I will read a bit about that. Living in Ramallah, I had come to know every corner of Palestine like the palm of my hand. After 59 years of exile, my mother finally joined me for an epic visit. But by that time, she had grown old, with signs of an arthritic body and a fuzzy memory. She held my hand or walked arm in arm with me as I helped her negotiate the narrow cobblestone alleys of the old city. Years ago, I had dreamt of being guided by Mama in Jerusalem. I wanted to glide on ice with her again and feel her decisive and confident stride. But alas, it was not to be. Now, with our roles reversed, I had become her legs and her memory. My story is a memoir in two voices, my mother's and my own, the past and the present intertwined. She wrote me letters during my year in Ramallah, letters that told her story, her love of Jerusalem, and her loss of Jerusalem. While in Ramallah, I kept a journal. Daily, I wrote about my work at the school and the challenges teachers and students faced while living in a militarized, occupied town. I also wrote about my impressions of living in my homeland, a place I had inhaled since I was an infant, a place I had dreamt about and imagined for so many years. Eventually, my mother's letters and my journal became the inspiration of this book.
Okay, that's very nice. So then let's follow with that. For 49 years after your mom left, she comes back.
59, yeah.
Sorry, 59 years. She comes back.
Right.
Back. And then this is a very beautiful part of the book. We go back to the house. Do you want to share with us what happens there?
Yes.
A bit of emotion without spoiling the book, please.
Right. I was able to find the house. It took several years to find it because, people didn't have street addresses necessarily. And then when I found it, the current residents were not there. So I was able to get a tour of the garden because the neighbor upstairs was kind enough to let me in. So when my mother came, I knew exactly where it was. Interesting.
Sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you there for a few clarification. The house in El Baqa in West Jerusalem,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
And the people who live there now are?
Well, they are, the husband is an American Jew, and his wife is a Jew originally from Tunisia, but who grew up in France.
Right. And which I found fascinating. It's exactly how every Palestinian family speak. You knew exactly what to expect in the book. The description of the house, you already have a map, the trees, the floors, the size, the windows, everything in the house you already knew.
Yes, yes. Thanks to my mother's detailed descriptions, and when she had shared, her memories with me many years before, I had drawn a map, an aerial map of her house, the layout. And she would tell me where a potted plant was sitting, where a painting on the wall was hanging, every little detail. It gave me shivers, that she was just so tuned into her house.
I was even reading the book and hearing you speaking about it now, because often when first time I heard this, it felt as if people are exaggerating. But more and more and more I hear it, and the visual memory, as if the image just stopped. Yes. The minute they left their home, and the ability to contain and maintain the image and pass it on in the details to the next generation. And the ability of the next generation to receive that image is quite powerful as a humans to being able to do that, actually.
Yes, yes. It's like an imprint, I think, it got printed to my mother's brain, and many Palestinians have very, very sharp memories of their home.
All right, so you go to the house, you knock on the door, you ask to see the house?
Well, the first time I went there, like I said, the present residents were not there. But when my mother came, we tried again, and they weren't there. But the kind upstairs neighbor, a Jewish man, Israeli man, took us in the garden. There's a picture of us, my father, mother, sister, and I, under the tree holding oranges. And then after my mother passed, I knocked at the door with the help of an Israeli friend, and the people were there, and they let me in. The woman was very kind and gracious to me, and was willing to share the house, which she kept. And that was a big plus for me, that the house remained with its own arabesque quality. The arches, the wrought iron, the things were beautifully kept. She's an artist, and she was, and because she was born in Tunisia, she had also, that Arab background in her. And so I took a tour of the house, and like my mother, I felt so, you're going to think it's crazy, but I felt happy, because all of a sudden I was connected to this place, to my mother's. I could see my mother running in the house as a small child, my grandmother at the kitchen. It's almost as though I was able to capture Palestine pre-1948. That house, going into that house, was like a time travel for me. Of course, there's the reality that the house, my mother was driven out of the house. There is that reality. There's the political overlay, but I'm talking from the heart now. I'm talking about that house meaning so much to my family, and my mother leaving it and never having access to it for 59 years, and then having a little fraction of access when she goes into the garden. But my mother was also happy. You see the picture of her in the book where she's smiling in front of her house, and she looks 20, 30 years younger. I'm very grateful that we were able to enter the garden and I entered the house. That doesn't happen to many Palestinians. They're very often asked to leave, and they're not, sometimes even the police, the current residents will contact the police to ask people to get out of the way. And Palestinians have suffered that, not only the loss of their home, but the expulsion right in front. In fact, I will read a little piece about that. During one of my visits to Jerusalem, I had a bad experience while strolling down my mother's street. An older Polish Israeli woman whom I had met a week prior while trying unsuccessfully to find my mother's house recognized me and accosted me with an indignant, "What are you doing here again? Go away, go away." The disdain in her voice left an indelible mark on me. It was hard not to interpret her comments as a second expulsion. I was not there in 1948, but I was being driven out now. After I recuperated from the woman's rejecting remark, I wondered what it takes to belong. Is it citizenship, falling in love with a place, getting married, residency, genealogy, owning property? With my colorful international background, I was clueless. I was good at naming geographic places of origin, but they didn't reflect who I truly was. It was complicated to say I was a Palestinian belonging to a country not represented on the world map, or a Syrian via my paternal lineage, and finally an Egyptian because my name was printed on my Egyptian birth certificate. It was only years later that I came to understand that identity is where your heart lies. It is not the product of official documents or genealogy. In my case, it was fashioned by love, by stories, by a sense of belonging, all inspired by my mother, who, like the lonely loon at night paddling on the lake, sang her mournful song about Palestine from the day I was born. I grew up learning that tune.
Thank you. That's very nice and emotional. We have a question here on language. You wrote the book in English. I'm guessing you're writing your diary in English, but your mom, you speak few languages, of course. You lived in Switzerland. I'm imagining there are 3 or 4 on the list. Your mother wrote your letters. Were there letters in Arabic or also in English?
Well, my mother spoke 5 languages, and when she started to talk to me on Skype about writing me letters, I said, "Mama, please write them in English so that my sons, only one of my 3 sons is fluent in Arabic, so that my sons and grandchildren in the future will be able to understand your letters in your own words, not through translation." So her letters were in English.
And the oral history, the storytelling that was it happening in Arabic or happening in English?
It was trilingual. When I English, French, and Arabic. When I interviewed her for 7 hours, I have 7 hours worth of audio tapes of her talking, and she jumps. That's something that a lot of trilingual or bilingual people do in the Middle East. One word is in French, one in English, one in Arabic, and she goes back and forth.
Sure. I just think sometimes it's also expressing languages, expressing emotions, and speak about such deep feelings.
Yes.
The use of language and how that actually transcends languages or does not, or how it is hard sometimes to describe these emotions in, I don't know. I don't want to slag off a language, but probably English will be the coldest one to express such emotions.
Yes.
But you really done beautifully that in the book. I'm keeping praising the book because it was really deserved that.
Thank you, Mahmoud.
Dealing with the return, the whole concept of return, it is, do you feel like your dream of returning has been fulfilled? Are you satisfied with your 2 years coming back at home? Is that the aspiration for return, or can that be one of the arrangement for returning? And what does really return means to the Palestinians emotionally? I mean, we know physically the possibility, the impossibility, and the practicality of this and international law and the rest of it. But what does really returns means? There is a part of the book where you including Amos, I think, but also another Israeli characters in the book, and the way they really related to the story. And I wonder if they're, I don't want to put your words in mouth, but it felt to me as having kind of an Israeli approval of your story and of your displaced story helped in a way accepting that a partial return to home or a visiting home is perhaps a satisfying return. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, you make total sense. I think that I was fortunate to be in the company of Israeli people with a conscience who are not happy with a lot of the policies that are happening towards Palestinians, and who were there to open doors for me to support my quest of finding my mother's house, of the tour I give to a group of Israeli people in Bekaa. And these were my allies. These Israelis continue to be my allies. And I know there are many of them in Israel who are allies to Palestinians. So I don't like to generalize and think that the government it's only in the government that we're looking at. We need to look at human beings and daily interactions. I think that the whole notion of return that you bring up is interesting. That when you say, was it enough to return for a year or two? It's I know you meant it facetiously. It's not enough. When something is home, going back for a year or two is a drop in the bucket. It's a little appetizer, basically, a mezze, it's not the full meal. Realistically, I've lived most of my life outside of Palestine. What I wish I could have was access to Palestine, not with a limited visa, so that I could go and spend time there when I wanted to. Whereas now, I'm allowed 3-month visa, of course, but, and that is, I hope it continues after this book. I have no idea whether my status has changed, but I hope that I could continue to visit if I want to, and stay as long as I want to, or buy property if I wanted to. These are things that are not possible for me as a Palestinian in the diaspora. I think that if it can be done, and I think Zochrot has some, and I admire a lot and respect the work that they're doing. They are looking at realistic ways of starting this conversation and finding ways for Palestinians who want to return, so repatriation, and also how to integrate the society without, creating another refugee problem, because that's not the aim of normalizing and bringing together these two people, these two populations. But it's time, 74 years in exile for Palestinians in refugee camps. That, how many generations is that? 3-4 generations now. So yeah, something has to happen.
Well, let's stay on the optimism side, Mona, and let's hope that next year you will fly Palestine Air and your Rasib Za'atar on the plane while you're returning home. I have a very detailed question here from Samia Khouri. She's asking you about the boy you mentioned in your book that he seemed quite troublesome, if he had eventually mellowed.
I did not stay in touch with him personally. The year after I left, he went on to middle school. So the teachers who had worked with me, the counselor and the principal, were not able to track him as he went on to middle school and high school. And so sadly, I do not know what happened to him. He was very challenging and was suffering. He was a boy who was certainly affected by not only the situation, political situation of Ramallah, but also of his family circumstances. And he's not alone. There are many other children suffering like him. So unfortunately, I do not have an update on him, sadly.
Since the book is published, unfortunately, your mom has passed away. She passed away before the book came out.
Yes.
I don't know if you want to say a few things. Probably wasn't easy for you to complete the process without your mom on your side.
I know. It was hard. It was hard on publication day, which was August 6th last year, because there was sort of an empty chair next to me in my imagination. You know, I wanted to be able to raise my glass and toast to her, because really, without her, this book would never have existed. And so,
in so many ways, and she comes alive in so many pages in the book anyway. And I think doing the book in a way is giving her an eternal life, at least for those people who are reading the book.
You're right.
Have you kept any relationship? Are you in good terms with the, I'm going to use a fantastic English word, with the current occupier of the house, the people who are living in the house now, in your house? Are you in a good relationship?
I tried to make contact right after the woman had shared her email address with me. I wrote to her to thank her, and I sent her a picture of my mother from the early 1940s, sitting in a car in front of the gate of the house. But I never heard back from her, from the woman. And I think that's the limitations of our relationship. I think it would have been nice, like in Sandy Tolan's book, The Lemon Tree, to have continued a relationship like he describes in his book between the occupier and the Palestinian refugee. I didn't have it, but it's all right, you know, it's all right. And I have made sure not to be very precise about where that house is, because I think I need to preserve these people's privacy. In fact, in the comment in the chat, I see that the gentleman who opened the door for me, who spoke Hebrew with her, is there today, you know, listening in and watching this. And I'm really grateful to him for having done this. You know, he really helped me in ways that he will never know.
I wonder if I can push you a little bit further on this, Mona. The language you're speaking, you wrote them, you thanks them, you appreciating that they actually allow you into your own house. And this is really very, very nice of you and quite, commendable. My question is, and it's a general term, maybe you could reflect on it, not just in Palestine, but definitely including Palestine. When is the time, and is it really a necessity that the oppressed have to eventually take what we may want to call the higher ethical, moral ground of forgiving and moving on and establish this seemingly normal relationship when nothing is actually normal about someone taking your house and living in it and you asking permission to open for them? Is there anything you would like to comment about this?
That's a tough question, Mahmoud. It's not taking the moral ground. Basically, it is, for me in any case, I'll just speak for myself because I don't know how others are coping. I do not want to live my life with anger and hate, because eventually they take over your life. And I'm also privileged not to be facing daily the injustices that are happening in Palestine and Israel right now. So I feel that I have this distance, but I also know other Palestinians in California and other parts of the world who are living with so much anger. And I'm thinking, you know, our houses were taken, we were displaced, And now, does that mean we have to live our whole lives carrying that anger? It's like one extra humiliation and brutality. So, you know, I'm trying to give you a sense of how I'm coping. So I feel that if I can have gratitude in life for what I have, and if I can find a way to educate people about Palestine, I'm doing something. I'm transcending the pain and the hatred and the anger. And maybe other people have other ways of transcending it, and maybe other people can't transcend it. But I think that thanks to my mother, I learned a few things about humanity and about our mental health and well-being. And I'm trying to live that.
Mona, thank you very much for sharing so deeply with us. It is a story of Palestinians finding many places, but always longing for home. I hope that we all find home and find our ways of making home any place that we feel comfortable. And you described it beautifully as how we see it ourselves.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for writing the book. It really is an inspirational, and I think it's kind of other Palestinians who are also thinking about writing their story. It's an encouragement, and I think you join me in encouraging people who doubting if they should write or they should not write. They should write the story, even if it is similar to any other story. It is still unique to the individual and to the family. I wish you best success. And as the book is, I'm understanding that it's out in English recently, but it's probably going to have another life in another language.
No, it's not out. It's you can order it.
Out as published. It's been.
I thought you meant out of print. Yes, it's in English right now, and my publisher knows that I highly pressed that it be translated into Arabic. They are looking at possible translations. I'd love it to be also published in French and German, but for now it's in English only. You can order it as a paperback, but also on Kindle as an ebook, as well as an audiobook, beautifully narrated by a Palestinian compatriot who did a beautiful job in the narration.
That's very nice. And if you choose to buy it from the educational bookshop as well, we share in the link as well if you want to support a local bookstore.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you very much for the audience. Thank you very much for Zochrot, who allowed us to it's very unique to have a Palestinian, another Palestinian speaking about Palestine, giving a platform by an Israeli organization. So I also thanks Zochrot for making that tradition, hopefully a tradition. Yes. And allowing the Palestinians not just to write their story, but to also speak about their stories. Do you want to add anything?
I'd like to end by thanking you, Mahmoud, for this wonderful conversation we had this morning. Well, my morning. It was rich in history and in the sense of belonging to Palestine, which was important. But I also want to thank Zochrot for inviting me to speak, for the amazing work that they're doing. I value your position, and I respect everything that you're doing, and I support you from the bottom of my heart. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you. The mic is back to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Mona, for these words. Thank you both for this wonderful conversation. It was so thoughtful, so moving. And to have the opportunity to listen to you. Thank you all to our audience for listening on this conversation. We continue our series tomorrow with an online tour, a virtual tour to Imwas. And if you are in Jerusalem on Saturday, we have an actual on-the-ground tour to the depopulated village of Ein Karim. So you're very welcome to join us. Go to the educational bookshop, to the website, or to the actual shop, buy Mona's book, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you. I would love to have the questions and the comments in the chat. I don't know how to copy that, but if there's a way to get that, I would love to see who attended.
There is. I will send you everything.
Okay, thank
you all so much. See you again soon until return.
Bye-bye.
Right.